I have a few GensAce batteries that I got from Hobby Parts, and doing a review on them because I think these are really good batteries. I have a 2200 milliamp hour 3S battery pack. I have a 6S 3300 milliamp battery pack and a 5300 milliamp 6S. The 6S 5300 shows that it's a 30C rated. The 6S 3300 shows that it's a 25C, and this 3S battery is also a 25C. Now, one of the things that I found with the GensAce and some other battery manufacturers have really underrated, or I should say overrated, the C rating on their packs. I've taken some Hobby King Flight Max batteries as well as even Blue Lipos, and I've pulled less than the max C rating from the battery packs, and the batteries have gotten pretty warm. So I kind of think that in the case of the GensAce, that the ratings that they have for the C rating, I think, are more true to the better known brands like Hyperion and so forth. Just like what the Nanotechs that I've got have a pretty good C rating in terms of the max current. In terms of the internal resistance, those who are familiar with Ohm's law knows that if you put current through something with a high resistance, you'll get a higher voltage drop. What does that mean for batteries? Well, you want a low internal resistance, and internal resistance is typically measured in milliohms for each cell of a LiPo battery pack. What happens is that a voltage is applied to the motor through the speed controller, and the higher the internal resistance of the battery, the more the battery voltage will drop under load. So when you're giving full throttle and your battery, basically if it has a high internal resistance, its voltage output coming from that battery will drop compared to a no load condition. They all drop, but if it has a higher internal resistance, it's going to drop more. What does that mean? That means if you have a low internal resistance battery, you're going to get more peak wattage at the beginning and during your flight. Now, as a test here, I've got a few batteries. I'm going to make some comparisons of different batteries, and to make a fair comparison, I'm comparing the GensAce to these Nanotech batteries that I have because they're about the same price when you consider shipping. And I'm going to measure the internal resistance with an iCharger 3010B. This is a very good charger. Can put out 30 amps up to 1,000 watts with the 36 volt input. On a 12 volt battery out at the field, it'll put out about 500 or so watts, which is more than enough for fast charging these batteries. These batteries have a up to a 5C charge rate. So what you do is you take 2200 milliamp hours. Basically that's 2.2 amps times 5. Okay, so 5 times 2 is 10, and then 5 times 2 is 10. So it's basically 11 amps. Okay, you can charge that at up to 11 amps for this battery pack. And when you charge it at 11 amps, it's going to get a quicker charge, but the peak voltage, what happens with most chargers is that if you charge at 11 amps, then it's going to drop the current down to 1.1 amps when it gets into constant voltage mode, and there'll be a few hundred milliamp hours. Sometimes I've measured it to be about 50 to 150 milliamp hours left in there because of the way that most of these chargers charge at that higher rate. So just to let you know that you can charge at 5C with these, but it is better for the battery to charge at a lower rate. You will degrade the battery over time by charging at a high rate a little bit, and you will not get a full charge out of the charger by charging at the 5C. How much will it degrade? Not quite as much as pulling, more than 95% capacity out of it. That's what's going to degrade a battery more. But every time you fast charge or charge it while it's still hot or over discharge, you're degrading the battery a little bit, and you can typically see that through a higher or an increase in internal resistance. So I have my iCharger all plugged in into the battery here, and I'm going to measure the internal resistance. So I go through the menu until I get to special modes. I hit enter, and then I scroll through that till I get to measure internal resistance, and I just push and hold the button. Okay, and I'm getting 4 milliohms per cell, and this pack is pretty well balanced. I've got about, on this pack, 20 or 25 flights on it, so it doesn't have a huge amount of flights on it, but so far this pack has been holding. When I first got this, I think it was 4, 4, and 3. So I've been running this particular pack pretty hard for those 20, 25 flights, and the internal resistance is pretty good for this size of a pack. Here's a Gensace 25C 6L 3300. I've got that plugged in, and I'm going to measure the internal resistance on this pack. This pack I've got about 30 flights on. I've been flying in my 500 helicopter and also in an electric combat plane. It's been through 3 crashes in the combat plane, 2 pretty hard crashes, one where it ejected all the way out, so it's actually survived pretty well. Let me measure the internal resistance. Okay, so this is about 2 to 3 milliohms per cell, which is pretty good considering the number of flights I've had. Like I said, I think I've had about 25 flights or so with this pack. And here is a Gensace 5300 30C pack, and I'm going to measure the internal resistance of this here, and you can see that it's 1 to 2 milliohms per cell, and I've got about 25-30 flights on this. I've been flying this particular battery in my Align 550, and although I don't typically fly the 550 that hard, I have been flying this one a good 7 minutes or so, depleting it down to about 90%. So I've been pushing the, in terms of how hard I've been flying and how long, I've been trying to push this particular battery to more capacity. Maybe it wasn't 7. I know that it was a little bit, a minute and a half longer than I was typically flying previously with the Nanotech 5000s. So you can see this battery is holding up pretty well. Once again, it's got about 25 flights on it. I'm going to compare the internal resistance of these Nanotech batteries, and I got these Nanotech batteries in the spring, and although I've got about 40 to 50 flights on these with a lot of 5C charging, I'd say I've gotten pretty close to abusing these packs. But the internal resistance of this 3S pack is about 12. You can see 12 milliohms per cell on there. I did record the milliohm per cell rating of these when I got them new, and it averaged about 7. So when you compare that to the average of about 3 to 4 for what the Gensace was, I'd say the Gensace was performing better, at least new. And I did record these after about 25 flights, and it was about 8 or 9 milliohms per cell. So once again, the Gensace does seem to be performing, at least in my samples, better than the Turnigy Nanotechs. And these particular 2 batteries are pretty close in size and weight. The Nanotech is maybe a smidgen smaller and lighter, but not that much. So if you're looking for more power, I think the Gensace battery pack wins that contest. Now I have a Turnigy Nanotech 6S 3000, and you can see on here I wrote down the milliohms per cell for what this was when it was brand new. Basically I do it after a break-in of 4 or 5 flights, and here it's now averaging 9 to 8 milliohms, which is not bad considering it's got about 50 or so flights. And I had pushed this battery pretty hard, but once again I did record what it was at about 25 flights, and it was around 6 or so milliohms per cell, whereas the Gensace 3300 6S at about 25 flights is around 3 or 4 milliohms per cell. Now, one thing is this is a 500 helicopter size battery pack is what I used it for, and although it's got the same kind of size, let me zoom out here. Although it's got about the same size here, this pack is considerably thicker in this dimension because it's 10% larger capacity. At least at the time of this video, GensAce did not have a 3000, and it's a little bit heavier too. The GensAce is a little bit heavier, but I fly this in a Flybarless 500, and I also fly it in my EXI 500. I did the tray mod to fit this in the EXI 500, and I get plenty of oomph. I mean, I really don't feel the heavy that it's heavy on the helicopter. What I really feel is the power that that I get out of it when I need to punch out and do that kind of thing. So it's not a perfectly one-to-one comparison between these two, but this I think makes a better 500 pack. Now I've got a Nanotech 5000 milliamp 25C, and that's the closest thing that I have to compare that to the 5300, and I fly this in the 550. I've flown both of them in the 550, and they both have an equal amount of about 25 flights. I originally had purchased 2 of these, and I currently only have 2 of these GensAce batteries. After I had gotten them, they pretty much had sold out not long after I got them. I wanted to get one just to try it out. So the internal resistance of this 5000 pack here is about 3 to 4 milliohms per cell. With equal amount of flights on them, the GensAce was around I think 2 to 3 milliohms per cell, I recall, with a couple of the cells being 1. So the GensAce is slightly lower internal resistance compared to the Nanotech. So that's been my experience with the GensAce batteries. I think they are a good value for their money. You get good internal resistance out of them, and I know I've only had about 25 flights on them, but so far, at least what I could measure in terms of the performance, their internal resistance has not really been climbing up that much, even though I've been somewhat pushing them hard. I'm going to continue to push them a little bit harder and get some higher charge rates out of them. But what I invite everybody to do before they make their battery purchase is talk to people around on the internet, forums and so forth. RC Groups is a pretty good battery forum on there to ask questions, and it seems to me that the GensAce batteries do have a pretty good reputation. Ace Power manufactures them. They do have a website out there you can look up for Ace Power. You get more specs on the size and so forth. Where I got these from Hobby Parts, they didn't have a lot of dimensions and weight and so forth, but when I compare the actual weight and dimensions of the batteries to the Ace Power website, it came in pretty accurate. So I am impressed with these batteries, and I'll continue to get more of these as I need them.